One Piece. The
The
One Piece
One
grill.
Piece.
Yeah, I just finished volume 100, so that's very interesting.
You are elbow deep in Wano Kuni right now.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good natural. I don't know, like it's not a stopping point because volume 100's in the middle of the arc, and it was run of the mill for Oda. Like, again, I have the benefit of the SBS corner in that I it's not to say that you get a more in-depth understanding, but it's more like when you read the SBS corners for this issue, it's like, oh yeah, it's volume 100. Anyways, like that's like kind of the feel I get from it. Like it w- it was a special issue, but it wasn't like from his perspective, I guess.
It's not a thing of like there like volume 100 was a specific landmark in the story, but it is a landmark in the fact that like Oda made 100 books worth of manga, and you also read 100 books worth of manga. So I feel like in that respect, it's worth kind of looking back on.
Yeah, it is an epic story too, right? This is one of the bigger. I mean, yeah, it's one of the bigger stories when you think about it in its totality. Maybe not as big as like Alabasta. I know there's like a power scaling is not the word that I'm looking for, but there's very heavy implications in this arc.
What I appreciate about One Piece specifically is that we all engage in a bit of power scaling here and there. I think it's fun, but I will never ever take power scaling into consideration over the actual narrative. And what I like so much about One Piece is that Oda is very particular in how he presents these characters and presents their feats, to where if you are power scaling, those things have direct implications on the narrative, because he's very specific in what he shows characters doing and what he does not show them doing.
Well, and just like more than anything, it's a lot about like, hey, this is what I need this character to do in this moment. I like to think about it
Exactly.
like the Force in Star Wars. Force is whatever plot
It's a plot
device.
device.
Yeah, it's whatever you need. And there is a certain structure to the power. Obviously, there is like a stream. You
There's a
can
hierarchy,
hockey.
yeah.
Yeah, and the way oh, you can use hockey, but can you do it? Like, can you punch somebody without punching them? So yeah, like you can kind of see what the progression of it. But
Yeah, there's
in
there's
terms
levels to
of
it.
in those moments, it's more of like, hey, I want these characters to do these things in this moment, and I
Well,
really
yeah,
like that.
the feats have to have like some narrative implications, because I look at something like Dragon Ball, and Toriyama would sometimes let a character do something, or he would write a character to do something that would kind of just completely break the logic of the story if you kind of were to interpret it simply through the feats that the characters are able to do. But like I said, Oda's very particular in what he allows his characters to do, or what he shows them doing, to what we can kind of commit as fact.
And it's largely ambiguous too in One Piece.
Right. The narrative takes
There's no
precedent in that,
number
like,
on it, like in Dragon Ball, where it's, this guy's power is literally this number.
well, like, you have the bounty system, which I think is interesting because it does not specifically denote the power of a specific individual. It only references their notoriety. It really only makes reference to how notorious they are in the eyes of the world government, and how badly the world government wants their ass, you know?
Yeah, and characters are only as powerful as who they're fighting in that scene, essentially. Which is good because I think it makes it much more entertaining. Like I'm not thinking about, oh, like what's this guy's power level? What's his scale? You
I
know?
I kind of view that, like, because I think that is present in One Piece, but it is more so through like, what is this character able to do through. I think hockey is probably the biggest kind of measuring stick in One Piece, to kind of see how strong an individual character is.
Because there's a lot of sharpening of skills when it comes to hockey. So
Yeah, of course, and obviously the what we've seen in Wano is how adept are you at using Conqueror's hockey. That kind of is the signifier of if you are truly in the S tier. And even the S tier in One Piece has like multiple tiers within it, in my opinion.
So let's get into Wano. I mean, that's really what this is all about. I just finished volume 100, so I still have a while to go, I know, in this arc. But
Still about 100 chapters behind.
like Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like it really is. Like when I think about it through that specific perspective, like it's kind of crazy. Just because I obviously have been like reading it much later than the rest of the world. Essentially,
Right.
I know I'm not the only like One Piece. You know, like I know there's other people who are like reading it at the same time as me, but obviously like, it has a very dedicated fan base for the past 20 years. So I am essentially late to the party, but I'm very close. Like I've literally been reading it for a couple years now, just here and there. I haven't oversaturated myself with it. I kind of read it in chunks a little bit. I've kind of read it in arcs.
You're not too late to the party, man, because the only people who are going to be too late to the party are the people who start reading it after we all know what the One Piece is. And that's always my advice to people is that, like, I don't care when you start reading it, just make sure that you are up to date by the time we figure out what that thing is. Because there is no putting that toothpaste back in the tube.
But it'll get revealed essentially immediately.
And I think one last thing before you go into that point. Once everybody knows what the One Piece is, starting the series is going
Yeah, you
to
just
be
have to start it
fundamentally
over.
different. It's
Yeah.
going to be fundamentally different because I don't think there's going to be a person on Earth who is going to be able to start One Piece after it ends and not be affected some way by the fact that the One Piece is known, being public knowledge. I don't think that there's going to be a way to consume the story fresh without being affected by that
I'm just like
knowledge.
thinking back to that scene with Rayleigh when they're in that bar and he's like, "I know what the One Piece is. I could tell you, but you're not ready to hear it right now." Like so that you will literally just have a different perspective, I think, on.
I always love that moment because Usopp's like, "Yeah, sure, tell me what it is," and
Yeah,
Luffy
Usopp's
wants to
great. He's like,
fucking
no, you can tell me. Like, go ahead, I'm ready."
and Luffy wants to deck his shit.
Yeah.
Like, hey man, shut the fuck up. We do not want to know what the One Piece is.
So we're in Wano, and really, you and I have been having a little bit of discussion, kind of giving my live thoughts because this is fresh. I mean, I just finished Volume 100 like a week ago.
Wano
I think,
Act 3,
yeah,
the raid on Onigashima.
it's coming down, right? Like
It's the climax.
Kaido, yeah. We're definitely there, and I guess like my main thought is I like it. I think it's one of the better arcs, and I actually I will like preface this by saying just because people are so opinion on this stuff. I love Wano. Okay, I love every. I actually don't. I've never had a part where I'm reading One Piece where I'm like, didn't really like that.
One Piece is pretty good, man. It's like pizza.
Yeah, and you just like certain parts more than others. I do like this. I really do like Wano. I think it has what I think I love it is the history part, right? Every time they go to a new arc, you learn about the history of the place.
Yeah.
There is a literal weight, and he's a very patient storyteller. We know that as well. So he's willing to go as far as he wants. Like I'm literally going to go back decades, and just reveal it in small pieces. And I think there's some really strong parts. Of course, this is built around Japan, you know. So there's a
Right.
lot of Japanese history. It's samurai. It's very interesting, but it isn't just here is a samurai story. I mean, it is a samurai story, but it's not like he took it from somewhere. It's all about inspiration, which I think is easily the strongest part about it.
A lot of
And it's,
legacy talk in Wano. Yeah.
of course, it's very focused, right? They're in Wano. It's the story of Wano. But what I'm trying to drive home is I wasn't super like I don't know, like I feel like Wano even has its own merit without Kaido. I'm so invested in what's going on with the samurai that I'm almost like bummed out when the story shifts focus to a very completely separate thing. So what sparked this entire video idea is that we've been debating. Like I personally, not to say that it's bad. It's just that I personally believe that Big Mom didn't need to be a part of it. This is one of the bigger scales in terms of a story. Like even Alabasta, right? Like Alabasta is like literally a larger place, right? It's like a country, but it's like a
Alabasta's
big,
a bigger country, yeah.
huge, right? But the scale of it is like smaller than in Wano. There are so many different tree branches that are going off, and I know they're related to each other, but there's so much of a focus on them. It just feels like when you're in this final arc, it's like, okay, I only get like 5 minutes more progression of this story, and then it's done. And then I get five more progressions of this story, and then it's like wrapped up, and we go to the next part. where I would like in Alabasta, yes, there were separate sections of it going on, but it felt very like, okay, we're gonna focus on this for a while, and then we'll cut to this. Versus this, where it's like, man, I like literally barely am like getting my teeth into this section before they move on to the next, and I feel like he got a little. I feel like I'm like the verge I'm using is wrong like throughout this entire thing, but like the closest thing I get, it's like kind of like hamstrung himself. Like, okay, he's got to put Big Mom in there now. So where do all these characters fit in? And it just becomes so separated to the point where I'm like, it's good. I like it. It's not disjointed. Like that's not. It's not chaotic. It's not disjointed. But it's just so much to take in. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I remember this going on. And it's like before I even get a chance to settle in on the concept, I'm like, oh man, we got to go back to this other branching storyline.
So the things that you mentioned as like the strong points of Wano in that like the all of the thematic stuff, which I think are encapsulated in because Wano is divided story wise, it is divided into 3 acts, and I think the things that you mentioned as as the strengths of the arc are largely contained within the first 2 acts. And I would agree because those first 2 acts are what make it my favorite arc in the entire story. But when you talk about the sprawling nature of where the story is at, where you're currently reading, is yeah, for sure. They've definitely kind of gotten to a point where there's a lot of moving pieces happening, and to give each because this is what Oda does. He doesn't want to have to kind of shirk on anything. He wants to give everything its due. But
Yeah.
when it gets to a point where there's this many moving pieces, managing that can kind of get tedious. And that has probably been the biggest criticism of the arc that I see when people talk about it, is that like when you get towards the end, it gets very drawn out. We kind of have to jump through a lot of different areas. But you mentioned something earlier in that like your kind of frame of reference for this arc was Alabasta. And I've kind of always been a proponent of the idea that, well, one, this is part of a much larger theory, a very pretty popular theory about kind of the 2 eras of One Piece, the pre and post time skip arcs or sagas of One Piece, in that the pre-time or the post-time skip arcs, the new world arcs, so to speak, like everything after the 2-year time skip, has kind of been a thematic and at times aesthetic inversion of arcs that came prior to the time skip. And so where you talk about Alabasta being kind of like your frame of reference for Wano, I actually think it is more accurate to have Marineford as a frame of reference to Wano. Just from the aesthetics, of course, of like there's an all-out war involving, multiple emperors. Fact that you literally have Momonosuke, an heir to a king, to a lord or whatever, being up for execution the same way that Ace, the son of the pirate king, was being executed. And there's a litany of other things that you can kind of draw comparison to. But that is kind of how I framed my interpretation of Wano and how it happened. And I'm interested in why you think. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like you said even points where they kind of get into dealing with Kaido feels like a departure from the story. And that really interests me because I feel like Kaido is absolutely integral to every part of Wano.
I guess my feeling was because the first act is literally like building the story of Wano. And I think it's one of the strongest stories ever, like in the entire. It's one of my favorite plot lines that has ever been in the show. It just feels so real. I never felt so strongly. Yeah, like when the Toy Island stuff, like that was really good too. Like you could kind of like you could feel it a little bit, but like
Dressrosa.
I just like I feel Wano, like I feel for the people, like more than any other arc that I've
Right.
read. Where I'm like, man, I just want to live in this. And then it's like, oh, well, Kaido showed up. Like that's really like kind of how the plot is
Are you
presented. It's
talking
like,
about from the perspective of like the flashback and when he showed up, because in the story, Kaido has kind of been he's kind of been lording over Wano for like 2 decades at this point.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, like, how did he get to Wano? Like, it's more, it's really just, hey, I'm here, you know? Like, that's really kind of how they present it. And he's so powerful, obviously, that nobody in Wano would ever be able to stand up to him.
I think
He's
this
just on a
is
different level.
I think this is kind of like what we're going to start running into a whole lot more, is that so many people have been able to kind of consume One Piece in its complete entirety that they find themselves being gratified. If a plot thread gets started earlier on, they still have so much of the story yet to consume, that they find themselves getting gratified by that story pretty quickly, as long as they continue to read and watch, right? But with Kaido and Wano, and like how he even showed up in Wano in the first place, now we're getting into territory where stuff hasn't even been covered yet. And
Yeah,
I would say, as I know it seems like a cop out, like a lot of people view this argument as a cop out, but it's like let Oda cook, you know what I mean? Because it's like he's kind of showcased that he has the propensity to be able to do this, to kind of plant these seeds and kind of have a good reason for why everything is the way it is in his story. And we're kind of just running into the wall of just, okay, now we're getting into the points where he's planted seeds, and we have to literally watch them kind of come into fruition in real time, rather than just blitzing through the story.
and I will say this. I like, you can't have stories like you did first part. It's almost like the post time skip is like Shippuden, right? Where the scale is just on a different level. And I know you can't have arcs. Like, personally, I like the first half of One Piece more than I like the second.
That's a pretty popular sentiment. I think everyone kind of does. I think people, I wouldn't want to say they romanticize it, but there's a very fond nostalgia for the much smaller scale adventures that they had in the original, not the original, but like the first half of the story, so to speak. But I don't know, like for me personally, like while I do look back on those kind of arcs very, very fondly, and those are the things I feel like everyone will say, like those are the stories that get you kind of hooked on One Piece for life, and that kind of make you realize what you're watching. While I was going through the story for the first time, when I first watched it, like during the pandemic, I was craving. I was like, I really need to see how big because they make allusions to it throughout the entirety of the first half of the story, throughout all the pre-time skip material. It's like characters are saying all the time, you have no idea, you have no idea, you have no idea how big the world is, you have no idea how strong some of these people get. And now that we're actually seeing it play out in real time, I feel personally very satisfied, and I kind of just really can't connect with the people who are kind of like taken off guard by this, because it is kind of just like what has been hammered home throughout the parts of One Piece that they love so much, is that like this is always a through line of just like there's so much more that we do not know, and that we're going to find out as we progress through this story. And that's kind of always just been the point in my interpretation of it.
No, I understand what you're saying. And like, I feel like you have to have Kaido in this story. You can't go from Big Mom and then the next arc is just like this very contained story in Wano. So,
I mean, even from that perspective, Wano has been, as far as the landscape of One Piece, it is the most funneled, closed off, isolated story that they have told post time skip. 100%. Because we have no,
it
like,
is,
while we
but
have been in Wano, we have no idea what is going on in the world at large. We have not, at this point in the story that you're at, by the time you get to volume 100, the end of volume 100, we don't really know what's happened we don't know what the fallout of the Reverie has been after the dissolution of the seven warlords. And there's stuff happening. Like, we saw bits and pieces of our last little kind of tease of what was happening before diving fully into Wano. Was just like Blackbeard's making moves, the world government's making moves, and we get that tiny little nugget of info, and then we dive into 200 plus chapters of just Wano.
no, and it is, I think that's a big reason why it's one of my favorite arcs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've genuinely enjoyed it. I think this is probably the
Right.
most fun I've had. I don't know, fun, like, it's the most I've just man, like this is
It's such a
such
fulfilling
a
arc.
good grounding, like grounded story, you know. It really you put it in a really good light. Yeah, like this is one of those stories where you're just like sitting there and it doesn't necessarily directly relate to the One Piece. It does, obviously. You have a samurai who goes off with, you know, the most important pirate in the entire story.
It's ironic, right? Because yeah, like the events of just like we talked about this offline. Every pirate at this point in the story who is at this point in the new world is in serious contention for finding the One Piece. They are serious
Because they're
contenders for
close. They're like
finding the One
physically
Piece.
close
Yes.
to it. Yeah.
And
They're
so when
like
you think
almost
about
there.
like, oh, we're gonna just go do 200 chapters at in the Wano country,
Yeah.
and really
The
the
most
only thing you
important
can
parts have
get,
nothing to do with the One Piece.
yeah,
The literal most important parts, but have nothing to do with One
the
Piece.
really like yeah, because it's like from a utilitarian standpoint, the only thing you can get out of this is poneglyphs, right? Like that's the only
Yeah.
thing that's going to get you closer to the One Piece. And it's like, oh, okay, we're not going to spend 200 chapters looking for poneglyphs, but at the same time, again, this is a very kind of isolated, closed off story, and ironically, because of that, we get more kind of we literally see Roger finding the One Piece. It's like we get closer to the One Piece than we've ever been
Yeah, like
through
it happened.
Wano. Like
Yeah, like
we saw him
they did
find
it.
it.
They did it. Yeah. And they're like, all right, guys, good job.
All right, let's back it up. Let's get out of here. We don't need it or anything. That introduces so many questions of just like, okay, he found it. Why didn't he take it? They
Why
show
didn't he
him
use
after.
it?
They show him after he found the One Piece, and he's like, doesn't seem like anything's different.
They just seem happy to have done it, you know? So the journey, it's the friends he made along the way. Like there literally was like that kind
Yeah,
of.
you just open up the treasure chest, and it was just a mirror to
Yeah,
see
definitely one
all
of my
your
favorite
your crew.
characters. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head, of course, but the samurai who goes with him, what's his name?
Oh, Odin, the goat.
Yeah, yeah, like easily one of the best characters ever introduced in the entire
Yes,
series.
Odin is top 5 One Piece characters in my opinion.
Just like the feat of the boiling water, like it's just great storytelling, man. And then the guy in the cross, which is kind of insane, but the guy in the cross, like it's all just like those are some of the most memorable moments in all of One Piece for me, and they all happen in the same arc. Like that's usually I can pick out a piece from an arc where I'm like, ah, yeah. And I'm gonna go back
Yeah,
and read it. Like I already feel like I have the desire to do it, you know. Like I'm just gonna see the story in a different way. And also, I'm like I'm barreling through it, so yeah, I'm not obviously picking up on all of the small details here and there. I'm just trying to consume the story in like an enjoyable fashion, like having fun with it.
it
Um,
absolutely is the most reminiscent of those pre-time skip arcs,
it
to where
is.
it felt like the greater kind of machinations of the One Piece world are kind of independent from what the Straw Hats are experiencing, just by the nature of what Wano is it's closed off country from the rest of the world. Yeah, I think just from that, it's I think that's why it evokes kind of like a that same kind of nostalgia, that pre-time skip nostalgia, is because the events of it on its face are so disconnected from what is going on outside. But you know for a fact, because it's like you have to kind of consider the totality of everything. And from where you're at in the story, we are waging a war on one of the 4 emperors, and another one of the 4 emperors has joined that war. And again, it's a war. Someone's got to lose, you know? And so, like, when by the time the Straw Hats leave Wano, the landscape, just by its very nature of what they have done there, will have shifted massively. And that's without, without you even knowing what has gone on while they've been there. They've been there for like probably a month in canon, and you have no idea how all of the other pieces have moved while they've been down there.
And that's really cool. That's obviously one of the best parts about One Piece is that there like it is like a breathing living world, and I'm sure you will find out about some of the things that were going on during Wano. The world doesn't stop for like the One Piece crew. In fact, kind of moves really heavily without them. You know, they are simply like they're the main characters of the story, but like there are other big chunks going on. So I do want to talk about really
Big
the
Mom.
main meat and potatoes of this and what really got us going on
What
this
the
entire
hell
topic.
is Big Mom doing in Wano?
I I won't go that far. It makes sense. I'm not saying it's not shoehorned in at all, right?
Right.
You have this very intense climax, the literal arc before. They escape Big Mom, and they're like, "All right, we gotta go because we said we would be there, right, to Wano."
And
So
also, she's hot on our tail. Like, we gotta go. Like, we need to run away.
so yes, I know why Big Mom is a part of the Wano act,
Right.
but I will say I could have easily read through this, and I wouldn't have thought for a moment, why isn't Big Mom here? I know you have to address it. You can't just they can't just one up Big Mom, right? And then leave and then never
Just,
meet up with her again and like just
just
like
give
be
her
like,
the,
those kids.
just give
I
her the
know that.
Fortnite L dance and
Yeah.
run
And
away.
she's just like, they got me. So I know there's a vitriolic hatred there, of course, but it does feel like a bit much to me that
So
this story is so densely packed and there's so many storylines that I really like care about deeply, but I feel like when the moment that she arrives, it becomes so much. I feel like my eyes are like in 15 different places reading these panels. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that was Big Mom's, yeah, and then I part of it is because I'm reading the story so fast. Like I'm not like sitting
right.
through, I'm not rereading the chapters, so I get that, right? I'm not trying to say that I'm like, oh, this is too much. I know I'm flying through the story. I know I'm not gathering everything, but in that moment, when I'm reading the chapter, I'm like, oh man, yeah, that Big Mom guy is fighting like one of the Straw Hat crews. There's so many characters within Kaido's ranks. Like it's like, yeah, Kaido, you got his daughter. Oh, but then you got the samurai, but then you got the ninja that's with the samurai, and you have the side plot with Momo. Well, then you got Kaido, and then you got Kaido's crew, and they're fighting. It's like, man, it's like, geez, like I'm really like, there's so much going on that I wish I could just focus on the parts that really make the arc of Wano special. Like if it was just Big Mom, okay, yeah, but it's not. I know it's not the entirety. Like we literally got introduced to so many characters, and it was so good. Like the whole island with Big Mom arc was great, and the way that they disseminated. I know it's not like a full on. We're bringing everyone back. It's round two. It's certain characters and characters that were not necessarily highlighted, especially. So that's kind of cool. But again, you're introducing like 5 or 6 characters, and you have all these side arcs going on. So like as I'm reading, I'm like, man, I wish I could just see more of like Luffy fighting Kaido. I wish I could see, the Straw Hat crew focus on, the little antidote. Like I even loved that part, and that even gets interrupted a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that's just kind of those are my general thoughts, I guess, as I was like reading it raw.
I will concede the point to you that once all of the present factions are on the field, it does kind of get hard to follow. And I do think that this is a big difference between Marineford and Wano, is that Marineford, it is one large battlefield. And you really kind of just hop to different sections of the battlefield. The setting of Onigashima, the setting and where they are in the tower of Onigashima is
Uh,
important, right?
it's hard
And
to
it's so
conceive though.
yes, and so like it's hard to kind of get a picture of where in the building they are fighting rather than just it is one giant battlefield like in Marineford and we are just hopping on
Right.
different
It
sections of the
it literally is
battlefield.
like an open. It's quite literally just like an open place, and there's just
Yes,
like
because
different
like
parts of it.
they'll be like the third floor of Left Brain Tower and I'll be like I have no idea where that is. Right? The only people who I know where they are at for sure is Luffy and Kaido cuz they're on the roof. They're
That was so
literally
yeah,
fighting above
yeah.
everybody else.
That we
Those
know
are the
I know
only
that's the
people,
top
yeah.
level. Yeah, that's for a fact. That's the top level because you can't go any higher. Yeah, like I right now I can't tell you where any of the pieces are, and they cross each other all the time too. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
oh,
So
Big
it's like,
Mom's here now. Oh, like where are they? I don't even
yeah,
know.
I have no idea where characters are like in relation to one another. So I will concede that point to you in that like that is probably a shortcoming of the arc in that I don't have a good enough sense of the setting to kind of have it be a part of the story where it's like, oh, I got to race to the other side of the tower to go help out another crew member, and it's like I don't even know where you are in the first place. So that part, I think it's very valid. I really don't fault anybody for this because I am a nerd about this and I get very into the weeds about One Piece because I do think that I will go as deep as somebody allows me to in their story. If you provide me with enough to go deep with, I will. And so I do think, like, for me, the political aspect of One Piece has always been the most interesting in that how different factions form, how they consolidate power. And so I do think familiarizing yourself with the factions at play is really, really useful in terms of being able to understand the story. So when we talk about Wano, we're not talking about just the Straw Hats taking on Kaido. We're not talking about the Straw Hat Pirates taking on the Beast Pirates. We're talking about the Ninja Pirate Mink Alliance. Awful name, but whatever. We're talking. So that consists of
That's even another wrinkle of the story that's almost like half forgotten, dude. Like,
exactly, but I think,
man,
but it is prevalent, and I think it is relevant to like and important to kind of keep in
it,
your mind as you go through the story
so that's what I'm
because this
saying. Like,
alliance,
I actually do like that part of the story, but it's like, dude, you only get a few seconds of it here and
I
there, you
no,
know.
what do you mean?
Like, I understand it from its principle, and I actually think it's like one of the most
The alliance,
validating things. You're like, wow, like this has actually been building for a long time behind the scenes.
right?
And it kind of adds a different context. But what I'm saying is like I don't get enough of it because there are so many other things going on in different places that it's like I don't even do I almost becomes such a small part of the narrative.
I disagree with you just because I think it provides like an umbrella for you to kind of better divide aspects of the story and better organize them in your head. Because when you think about it, not just as the Straw Hats and their buddies taking on Kaido, but when you reframe it as the Ninja Pirate Mink Alliance, which consists of the Straw Hats, the Straw Hat Pirates, the Heart Pirates, which is Trafalgar Law's crew, the Akiaza Samurai, and the Minks of Zoe, all under one alliance. That's an entire faction there. Then you have them essentially adding to the alliance the Kid Pirates, the two Kid Pirates uh that are on Wano, Eustace Kid and Killer, kind of being co-opted into that alliance. And then you have the Beast Pirates and the Big Mom Pirates. When you think
Yeah.
about that as like, okay, we have three factions present on Wano. Because it's like, again, if you think about it, it's like, oh, we have the Straw Hat Pirates and the Heart Pirates and the Samurai and the Minks. And it's like, when you think about it, like at that granular level, it gets a lot harder to kind of track. But I think if it's like, if you just boil it down to these three factions are the ones who are fighting at Wano, I think it becomes a lot easier to kind of track what's going on.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I would the only like spatial, like that's the only thing that I would have a real issue understanding. Like I just have no like in Impel Down, you're like, ah, there are 6 levels. When
Right.
you go down another level. You know, they do mention it that this place that they're in does have levels, but it's just there's just no frame of reference, I
Okay,
guess. Like it's
I bring up the kind of organization of the alliances and kind of who is on whose side, just
yeah,
to
I would
say
never
like
say I was lost.
no, but like when I
Definitely
say
not.
I say all that to say like when you think about the like these are legitimate fully codified factions. Luffy and Law shook on it. Like we are in an alliance to take
Yeah.
down Kaido, right? This is the culmination of something that happened in quite literally the first arc in the New World. Punk Hazard, like they agreed on this in chapter 600 or whatever. They're like, we're going to take down Kaido, and it's taken 400 chapters to actually get to the culmination of that plan. But when you think about the agendas of each of these factions, the agenda of the Ninja Pirate Mink Alliance obviously is to take down Kaido. Everyone in that faction has their own reasons for doing so, but they all have the same objective of just like we got to Kaido shit up. The Beast Pirates have their own agenda. Obviously, it's to turn Wano into a weapons manufacturing state and to consolidate power that way, and then eventually kind of overpower everybody and get the One Piece or whatever. And then you have the Big Mom Pirates, obviously, that they have their own agenda in that they also have their own way of consolidating power through all of the political marriages that Big Mom arranges, and the how they build up their numbers, and again acquiring more poneglyphs to ultimately find the One Piece. So it's like when you view it like that, I think it makes way more sense as to why Big Mom would want to show up in Wano. And so we can finally get into the weeds on this point here because it's like we kind of just been setting up this kind of main contentious point that we both kind of disagree on is that what is Big Mom's utility there? Because I think when you look at it through that lens and kind of how all of these pieces and factions have shifted and moved, it is almost essential for Big Mom to go to Wano. It would be kind of dumb of her if she didn't go to Wano.
Yeah, see, like I feel like you view it as in, oh, Luffy's there. This is my excuse to go into Wano. I just didn't get that vibe from it as I'm reading it. My feeling was that she immediately wanted to get her lick back for what had happened with Luffy. I didn't really get this. I feel like the whole alliance kind of became like something on the fly. Like, oh, okay, yeah, like this is great. Like this kind of worked out in my
Are you talking
favor.
about the alliance? Are you talking about Luffy's alliance or Big Mom's alliance with Kaido?
Big Moms with Kaido. Like I don't think
Yeah,
she came to
for
the island
sure.
being like, "Oh man, this is my chance to team up with Kaido."
I think I sent you a panel in our little text discussion prior to this, and we can throw it on screen. And I'm sending it to you right now. I think Big Mom, what Luffy does on Whole Cake Island is legitimately damaging to Big Mom. When you consider why she was having a Sanji marry her daughter in the first place, it was to gain access to Germa Double Six's military might. It was a legitimately like
True.
probably
Like I
one of
don't.
the like from a political perspective for Big Mom, it was probably one of the biggest marriages that she was going to arrange for her pirate crew. In that she would gain access to probably the best military technology in the One Piece world outside of the world government. And in this panel I sent you, she's very clearly like, I'm here for Straw Hat, but also it's like she's also not stupid, you know? She's one of the four emperors, and I think anytime the four emperors cross paths, like you kind of can't let it slide, especially if Big Mom is going directly onto Kaido's territory. I think it's implied in this panel that I sent you and that we can throw up on the screen right now is that she knows what she's doing when she's coming to Wano, and that her presence on Wano is not going to go like unchecked. Like there and I think that that's evidenced by the fact that as soon as she does show up on Wano, her crew gets rocked by Jack. And that's the whole
Yeah, like
reason
they
she gets the
literally try to
amnesia and
kill
stuff
her.
like that.
Yeah. So what I'll say is I agree with you, and I think that it isn't just it wasn't shoved in there, right? This was
Right.
like it wasn't just he was like, I just let me just figure out what would happen. Like I think it was definitely planned. I think that he's like, this is something I want to be part of the story. I guess just my main argument, and like I think when you view it from an overarching story standpoint, you're like, yeah, that fits in. You could see it building right in the arc before. Yeah, he's like literally trying to marry to get into Germa 6 because she wants to. She's very strategic. That's why she has kids with certain people to make
Right.
alliances. Like that's been built up, and it's very valid. It doesn't feel unauthentic in
Right.
the story. I guess just what I'm saying is, I does feel for sure like it takes away from like the story of Wano, right? When you think again back to Alabasta, there are big overarching things. There's an emperor involved,
A warlord.
um, a warlord, and
Again, I think again, like
like that's a big part of it. You know what I mean?
not to
But
no, but like not to step on your point here, but I do think again, like the distinction between the factions is important here because the four emperors and the seven warlords are not the same. You know what I mean? It's like they are all pirates, but they are not the same. They do serve different agendas.
no, for sure. But what I guess I'm trying to say is like, the warlord represented in Alabasta something beyond Alabasta. So I think that you can have those kinds of stories, but like the end of Alabasta is the celebration of its freedom. And I
Right.
know I'm gonna go ahead and guess that Luffy doesn't die. Okay, he's gonna win.
No, dude, it's all over
crazy,
here. Actually,
crazy take, really.
it's all over here. It's all ending.
I know how this is gonna end, and I know there's gonna be a celebration related to the freedom of Wano and all the great
Right.
things that brings. But I just feel like there's going to be so many other storylines that are wrapping up at the same time. Like it's going to be hard to really feel that validation. Okay, you really like breathe it and feel it on Dressrosa and Alabasta. I just don't think you're going to get that you just can't get that level of validation because there's just so many massive overarching stories going on at the same time. It's almost going to be a side point at the end of this story that Wano was freed, I
I'm
guess,
gonna
is what
be
I'm trying to
honest.
say.
I'm gonna be honest. I do think that's you getting kind of caught up in the nostalgia of those moments, because, again, like when you talk about like liberating Alabasta, liberating Skypiea, or think of any of like the celebrations. It was like, hey man, we didn't know how we were gonna get out of that situation, right? We kind of got ourselves into something and we kind of just did whatever we could to set out, like to get out of it. I think the framing is completely different around Wano, in that like we're going here and we have an objective. We have a job to do here, you know? Where it's like they kind of found themselves in Alabasta by circumstance. But this was this was probably the biggest planned undertaking that Luffy's crew has done to date in the story. In that, like, here's our objective. We have to go there and be as calculated as we possibly can be in accomplishing that objective. Because again, Alabasta, you're not even close to finding the One Piece. You have a toe dipped into the Grand Line at that point. But by the time you're at Wano, you're kind of in the red zone for finding the One Piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know you have to move the story forward in like bigger chunks than what they were doing, just because you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like we've gone all out. Like since Marineford, like there's just no going back. Like any
Right.
story that's being told has to be on a different level, you know. I guess that just this whatever happens with Big Mom is going to be so story altering, and
Okay.
with
Yeah,
Kaido.
that goes into another point I wanted to make, in that like we have to think about the dichotomy of the new world in comparison to the the Grand Line, because in canon the Grand Line is split up into two halves. You have the Grand Line and you have the New World. The New World is on the other side of the Sabaody archipelago. It is territory that is, for all intents and purposes, controlled by the four emperors. The Navy does not have nearly as much power in the New World as they do in the other half of the Grand Line that the Straw Hats had to fight through to get to that point.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it from that perspective, you don't get through the New World. You do not get through the second half of the Grand Line without either defeating or aligning yourself with one of the four emperors. And we see that because Jinbei is aligned with Big Mom by the time we see him in the New World. Scratchman Apu, X Drake, Basil Hawkins, a good amount of the members of the Worst Generation are aligned with Kaido, because
He
we
beat
saw
them.
at the tail end of exactly at the tail end of Dressrosa, Kid and Hawkins and X Drake and all of those guys tried to press Kaido and be like, yeah, this is the way the new world goes. We either go through you or we end up being subordinates under you. And we all saw how that went. And so when we think about that in the perspective of Whole Cake Island, they escaped Big Mom. They did not go through her in that sense. And so that has to be accounted for in some way. And I don't really see a way how you do that, considering the fact that like Whole Cake Island is a part of, like, there's no going back and changing the events of Whole Cake Island. We just kind of be like trying to retroactively book the story, and that's not really something that I like to engage in, as far as just like, here's how they should have done it. The way he did it is the way he did it, you know? And when we think about like, oh, okay, what does a potential conclusion to the long running Big Mom plot line look like if it's not in Wano? That was always kind of like my point of contention with you, is that I don't really understand. I don't see how we can kind of push the story forward and still kind of have Big Mom be involved if it wasn't happening in Wano.
I think that it could have been part of the finale. Like they are at whatever looks like the last final location, whatever that may be, because who knows? Because
You
they
really
basically
want
said they don't know, but
you really want but do you really want the guy that they're like, do you really want the last emperor that they're facing at the goal line to be Big Mom? Like, you wouldn't rather it be Blackbeard or Shanks?
I mean, considering the amount of patience that he's gone through, I could see part of it being Big Mom, and then they go like I think it would. I think the finale is going to be unbelievably long. I think there's going to be tons of different. It's going to be like WrestleMania.
I just
There's
think
going to
for
be a
the
whole card book. It's not just going to be Blackbeard and then they get the One Piece.
I think
I
for
really don't
this
think so.
I think for the sake of the narrative, it has to be more focused. And I think when you look at the current roster at the point of Volume 100, the current roster of the four emperors, you got Shanks, you got Blackbeard, you got Big Mom, and you got Kaido. The narrative relevance of Big Mom and Kaido compared to Shanks and Blackbeard, way lower on the hierarchy, in my opinion. And so I think it makes way more sense. Like, if we're just talking from a story utility standpoint, we're not talking about the execution and how good the story is going to be. I think we're both in agreement here. Whatever he ends up doing, it's gonna rule. Like, it's gonna be awesome,
Oh, it's going to
right?
be amazing.
But we're just talking about strictly how the pieces get moved into place right now. And I think if we're talking about these characters solely from their utility in how Oda wants to tell this story, I think they are way lower priority than whatever it is you have planned in utilizing Blackbeard and Shanks towards the end. And so I do think it makes way more sense to milk them for as much of the utility as they have and sweep them both off the board at the same time, because I think we're again, like, everyone is kind of like, even people who have kind of been throughout the entire journey, like watching or reading since 1999, are getting to the point where it's like, okay, I feel like you are kind of dragging it in some places. Well, there are a lot of people who would say that he was dragging it at certain points in Act 3 of Wano. And so do we really want to go through that, where a hypothetical second Big Mom confrontation post Whole Cake Island, where she's not in Wano or anything like that, would essentially just be solely so they can beat them? They're not going to gain any additional poneglyphs from her. They're not going to get any kind of. They're not going to get any closer to the One Piece by beating her at this point, if they've already beaten Kaido. And so I just think it makes more sense this way. Again, I think it's valid that the way they executed it was not perfect. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why people feel like, why is Big Mom even here in the first place? But I think the idea and the utility behind, the idea of why she's there in the first place, it makes a lot of sense to me, especially as far as how the story has been told up until this point.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Like I said, I'm reading it and I'm like, yeah, this all kind of this is coming together. But I think that you can tell that it was a little bit forced to a certain degree by having the first arc of Big Mom being there, being like, "Oops, she bumped her head." Like, you know what I mean? Like
Sure,
that to me is a little bit of evidence where he's like,
Amnesia.
"Yeah, she doesn't really super duper have anything to do with Wano, so we're gonna kind of keep her to the side for a while, and then she'll jump
Amnesia
in."
Amnesia is always kind of a cop out, in my opinion. And I think Oda, like, again, I'm not too mad at it, but I do think, yeah, it does kind of seem like, okay, he kind of he went about it from a perspective of, I do have to have Big Mom at Wano, but if she is there and her motivation is consistent throughout, then she's going to kind of mess up everything I have going on here. So I do kind of need her to be present, but she needs to be, from Yu-Gi-Oh perspective, removed from play for a little bit. And that's essentially what he does in Act 1 before she regains her memory. Because by the time in Act 2, I think everything is very, very consistent. By the time she gains her memory back and she's like, oh, okay, I kind of realized the landscape of what's going on here, it does make sense for me to align with Kaido.
Yeah, and it follows through. It's just like this is the most granular and convoluted I think the story's ever gotten in any arc. I think there have been more plot lines, maybe, like to a certain extent, in other arcs, but in terms of like trying to balance, like, here is the narrative of this specific arc, and here is the overarching narrative. It's like they are like, literally at heads with each other in this arc.
I do think it's just like, I don't think it's Oda working against himself in this regard, but it's or like that he's like suffering from his own success. But he has
Yeah.
given so much characterization to pretty much every character that's at play in Wano, that it's like, it almost feels like the fact that you are forced to give some characters less attention because Luffy and his crew are at the forefront of the story, and they kind of have to be, just because they are that's the whole point, you know? We're following the Straw Hats on their journey. But it's like, yeah, this is the culmination of Law's entire adult life. Like his goal has been to kind of, well, it was one to defeat Dofi, and that kind of happened halfway through. But the plan all the way back in Punk Hazard to take down Kaido and to kind of get closure on all of the elements that, you know, because Kaido is tangentially the reason why he had to suffer so much as a kid under the thumb of Doflamingo. You know what I mean?
They are related to each other,
And
and
so
it
they
is
didn't.
cool. Like I think Kaido is such an interesting character too, but
I love
I feel
Kaido.
like he just doesn't get enough time, just because he kind of just represents like I'm final boss. Like that's really kind of like the mainstay thing about him. I guess that he's like he literally is suffering from success,
He's such a
and
good final boss, though.
it's a dragon, which is cool. That's always great. That is one
And
thing that
again,
Oda's
like,
never forgotten at any point in any of the story. He's like, man, big dragons, that's cool. And I'm like,
and
yeah, it
again,
is. You're right about that. That's
and again,
awesome.
I won't spoil. Obviously, I won't spoil anything for you. But like, you're running up towards the end of Wano, but there's still a whole lot for you to kind of see and experience. So I would say, you know,
Yeah.
obviously, is like, I don't need to tell you this, but like, an open mind is kind of required for situations like this, especially just because we're not at the end. And I think that is kind of something I would kind of impart on everyone who reads and watches One Piece at this point in time, especially as you get into the next arc, because there is lore dumps everywhere in Egghead. And so like you really kind of have to keep your head on a swivel in that regard, because new information is going to constantly be imparted onto you, especially just as we get into the end game and all of the secrets start to get revealed, you know?
Yeah, I feel like you have to. I mean, they were like physically getting close to the One Piece, so like, there's only so much further they can go, like before the story has to reach some sort of climax. And
Is
there's
there
all these
anything
things going on.
is there anything that you'd like to see in a post Wano landscape? Because obviously you can kind of draw the conclusions on where it's going to go. Like Big Mom and Kaido are standing in the way of Luffy and his crew, and so obviously for them to come out on the other side, they would have to go through Big Mom and Kaido. Like I feel like that's not a spoiler. That's not like a crazy conclusion to draw. But like, what are you kind of thinking about once they're on the other side of that? Is there
I
anything
guess
that's kind of pressing on your mind about it,
I guess
especially just
Luffy's
like with the
dad
reverie,
is
like with
probably like the
everything?
biggest pressing mind. Like, what is he even doing this whole time?
Is there anything about like the reverie that interests you? Just because, like,
I mean,
again,
they
it was the last little nugget and tidbit of kind of the world at large that we got before diving into Wano for 200 chapters.
yeah, I mean, like one of the big things going into the arc was the world government, and that it's not as simple as like we'd like to think it is. There's like
Right.
way more powers at play. Like you have the Council of Dudes, like those rich people who dealt with the emperors.
The five
But
elder
now,
stars.
but now like there is someone even above that. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
know the full structure of the world yet. So that's probably one of the biggest things I guess that's going on, because while they haven't maybe not necessarily explicitly stated that they're also looking for the One Piece, it seems like they're more vested in keeping the secret of it. And like that is probably one of the biggest mysteries left in all of this. Is like they've clearly are the reason for this blank period in history. Like that's just a fact at this point.
They're
They're
responsible for it, yeah.
literally like murder people to make sure like that no one finds out.
They
But it
will
has to be
blow up
related to
countries to make sure no one finds out. Do you have any thoughts on the implications that dissolving the seven warlords will have?
yeah, I mean,
Did you have any kind of immediate reaction to that of just like, oh, I want to kind of see what happens in regards to that?
to
Because
a certain level, but at the
just to
same
recap,
time,
the seven warlords roster as of dissolution was Boa Hancock, Bartholomew Kuma, even though he's kind of dead, but they're still puppeteering him somehow. Dracula Mihawk, the alleged son of Whitebeard, Edward Weevil, and Buggy. Those are that's the seven warlords roster, the five warlords of the seven warlords of the sea.
I guess I kinda always viewed them as the Suicide Squad type of thing anyways, I guess, if that
Interesting.
makes sense, so, like, they all essentially did act on their own always, so the dissolution of it just kinda, like it felt more of a formality to me.
You think
And
so?
I know, like
Because
I know that Buggy's, like I think the last time I checked in, he was being, like, actively attacked by the world government, like, they're, like, seeking to eliminate them as
right,
pirates.
right, because of their status being erased.
Yeah, like, their bounties were back up, and, like, they were, like, scheming, like, "How are we gonna kill all of these people?"
Right, like the warlord to me, like it always, and I think the utility in the story was because we talked earlier about the shift in power dynamic as you move from the Grand Line to the New World, in that the Navy has considerably less power in the New World because the four pirates who reign over the New World are just so strong, in that like Navy intervention would kind of they've kind of just thrown their hands up and been like, it's not worth it. It's not worth fighting these guys. They'll govern that half of the Grand Line, but as far as the other half of the Grand Line, the seven warlords were used for the Navy agenda for the most part. They were used to kind of prevent new emperors from emerging. You know what I mean? And the fact that Luffy was kind of able to get through the first half of the Grand Line whilst running through several warlords kind of is the reason why he's kind of creating and making so much noise in the first place. And so I think Luffy is a big reason why the seven warlords failed, because the biggest reason that they gave for dissolving the system that they told us in the story, there's obviously other reasons I think that they I'll get into that in a second. But the two reasons they gave us were the fact that they caught two of them conspiring against against world government affiliated countries. And the only reason they were caught is because Luffy came through and wrecked the both of those dudes. He wrecked Crocodile and he wrecked Don Quixote do Flamingo, the two warlords who were scheming against the world government affiliated countries. I say all that to say, like, that's the reason that they give, but also it was legitimately their nuclear deterrent. It was their deterrent from preventing powerful pirates from crossing into the New World and upsetting the established order that they have. Because all of these things, I think Garp talks about it in the post Enies Lobby's arc, where he kind of just explains the four warlords, or the four emperors, in relation to the Navy and in relation to the seven warlords. In that the seven warlords keep the peace, or they keep some kind of equilibrium in the Grand Line at the behest of the Navy, so that the Navy can maintain just enough strength so they cannot be overpowered by the four emperors in the New World. And so for the Navy to look at that entire system of deterrence and being like, we don't need that anymore, that's a clear signal that the Navy has consolidated some kind of power that makes them think that we don't even need to be in league with pirates anymore. That we can kind of go out on an all-out offensive against all pirates at this point. And so that's kind of how that read to me. I'm
Yeah, that
curious as
makes
to if
Yeah.
that kind of resonates with you.
I guess the biggest issue is that it really is such a quiet backstory to all of this, which really just tells you, like, how just unbelievable, like, the whole story of One Piece, and that you can infer so much and you can get so much information just based off of, like, such a small it really is, like, you just get, like, a few panels here and there, a few chapters just snuck in there. It's usually, like, tangentially, "Oh, did you hear the news about Luffy? Anyways, here's this really crazy thing." Like, you know what I mean? And then you just kinda have to, like, put that in your back pocket. Like, it's nuts, man.
That is why I think it's so special, because I think with most stories, the deeper you dig, the more you kind of like feel like an idiot for like thinking about it, essentially thinking about it harder than the guy who made the story. I find that with Dragon Ball a lot, right? Because it's like the
Yeah.
deeper you dig with Dragon Ball on like the kind of details and kind of like the very kind of fine minutia of the story, you're gonna you're gonna realize things kind of fall apart pretty quickly. And I think it's like that with most stories. You're really supposed to kind of
Just any
vibe with the theme.
superhero
You're
story, it's
supposed to
impossible, almost.
you're supposed to vibe with the ethos and the theme of the story more than anything. But with Oda, he's so masterful at this in my opinion, that like he somehow makes the experience more rewarding the more you're paying attention. Because the whole reason I think this, and I was able to think this leading up to the arc that the manga and anime are currently in, is that this was a power that was revealed. It was at a point where like they during the war in Marineford, they recalled all of the seven warlords, and Teach kind of just flips them the bird the minute they do that. Right? Like he shows up, but he obviously has his own agenda, and his agenda flies directly in the face of what the Navy is trying to do at Marineford, which is win a war that they are provoking against Whitebeard. The fact that the Navy was chill with that because they had unveiled this new military power in the fact that they've cloned Bartholomew Kuma several times and have been able to give him insane powers multiple times over through all of these clones, that was very clearly a smoke signal for me that like that was kind of rewarded on the back end when they ended up dissolving the seven warlords. So it's like, oh, obviously whatever they've been working on with these Kuma clones has got them feeling comfortable enough with their arsenal that they can just tell all these pirates to fuck off. These pirates that they've been relying on.
Kuma is a very interesting character, and
yes,
I can only imagine because I guess he's in the middle of all of it. You know, like he kind of just like is tangentially related to any particular part of the story at this point. So, like his story is going to be of vital importance to understanding the context behind almost everything.
I won't get too deep into it, but you got no idea, pal. The pain.
Well, I guess that's the idea. Just
like, what was the saddest backstory that was revealed that kind of like made you kind of do a complete like on a character? Like, I feel like Naruto did this a lot, where it's like a character is presented in such a way before we get revealed their backstory, and then once you get their backstory, it's like everything is just like, oh god, dude. Like obviously Itachi is probably number one with that. Gaara too. I think Obito to a degree. All of their backstories kind of just provide so much perspective, and I feel like for how Kuma has been presented at this point in the story, I feel like you can only assume that his backstory is going to be very illuminating.
I think that's one of the strongest parts about Naruto, just like randomly, like when you think about it through that perspective. Like I feel like there's more emotional depth for sure to Naruto as a series. Like there is something somewhat free whimsical, I think, at all times about One Piece.
We think so.
Yeah, I think
there's been some serious pain moments in One Piece.
There have. Dude. But there's
anytime I think about Ace, I get sad. Anytime I think about Sabo, I get sad. Anytime I think about Nami's backstory, I get sad. Robin's. Who else? Who else has had just like a tragically poor, like, dude, pretty much everyone has had a really awful backstory in One Piece. Chopper.
No, I'm not saying that
backstory is crazy.
No, literally everybody does. What I'm trying to say is like I don't know. I guess it just feels more personable. I guess on some level when I watch Naruto.
I also think because the scale of Naruto is a lot smaller.
It's
a lot more intimate for sure.
They're like literally like in a country essentially.
Yeah.
Versus One Piece, which is an actual like globe,
like an entire world. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
All right, so man. You got anything else on One Piece you kind of want to get into? Any other thoughts?
No, I think
how do you think the fight with Luffy? We'll end it with this. How do you think the fight with Luffy and Kaido is going? What are your impressions?
So, like at the end of volume,
by the end of volume 100, I think
basically the word is getting out that Luffy died. Like that's what everyone, like that's the word that's getting out on the battlefield. Luffy died. And so people are like, no, he didn't. I bet he didn't. And that's kind of like where the story's at.
What are your impressions of how that's gone so far? Because I think this is also like I honestly like. I think the again this part of the arc has gotten so busy that I honestly think the anime adaptation of this part of the story is a lot better.
I felt that way about Marineford at certain points.
I would behoove you to kind of especially because I have volume 100 and I've read it. I've kind of flipped through it as you've been kind of talking to me about making your way through it. And I'm thumbing through some of these moments, and I remember I'm like, yeah, this moment was absolutely epic in the anime. So I would encourage you to kind of, now that you've, before you move on, to kind of go through. I would honestly encourage you to just finish Wano through the anime.
I am towards the end. I will say that I think that there's going to be some sort of transformation that is as dramatic on the level as that we have not seen since what's it called?
Gear 4.
CIP, whatever it's called. Like the first time,
CIP.
essentially, he goes the first gear or whatever. What do they call it? What does that secret organization called? They're like the CIA, but they give them like a different.
Oh, Cypher Pole.
Yeah, yeah, I guess.
Cypher Pole, the world government CIA.
Yeah, like when that fight he had.
Yeah, when he first does Gear 2.
Yeah, that's my impression that there's going to be something as dramatic as that to be Kaido. I guess that's like my only real thought.
I mean, yeah, like it's kind of, if you're not up to the point where Luffy gets that transformation, like it's kind of been pretty hard to avoid at that point. So like everyone knows what it looks like. He's gonna have to do
pretty nuts to beat him. I mean, that's really what
yeah, like everyone knows what it looks like.
He's gonna have to go even further beyond.
Yeah, it's might have to go a tad Super Saiyan, but like again, like it's. I think it's fine. Like, I think it's hard to avoid stuff like that. But I think just knowing like what it looks like, I think that's fine. I think as long as you kind of keep yourself,
it feels way worse than Dragon Ball. I will say that. Like when I get spoiled on Dragon Ball transformations, like it legitimately bums me out because like part of the aesthetic of it is the design. Like that's one of the cool parts.
The whole thing that makes it cool most of the time. Because like at this point with Dragon Ball, someone's gonna unlock a new transformation. Like,
and the fun part is like seeing what it looks like.
Yeah, like that's kind of and at this point in time, those are really all that it's for. It's like it really is for the aesthetic. Super Saiyan Blue was like it provided like almost no utility.
Like, it's the new Super Saiyan, guys.
Yeah, and so
but it's God Key.
Yeah, like that's the novel. Like that's really the only novelty of it. But I think as long as you kind of keep yourself ignorant of like the story implications of this new transformation that Luffy is going, because obviously there's going to be some story implications to it. Like that is the important part.
And they're very like transformation's like almost a dramatic way of putting it, you know. Like to a certain level, like he turns into like a kind of like a gorilla looking guy, you know. But it's like I don't know, I just can't explain it. It's just like I don't know. It's just like that's not what I'm looking forward to. I guess I don't know.
Like the fact that you've been spoiled on what it looks like is menial, in my opinion. And that,
I didn't realize. So I didn't realize that transformation, the one that was I guess leaked fairly recently. I thought that was after Kaido.
I don't feel comfortable delving into any additional details based on.
Well, I guess that's good. No. So I guess I really don't know then. I guess that's good.
Yeah, and so I'm saying, I really don't know. I think you're in a good spot in that, like, the only aspect of that transformation, I won't even tell you what it is.
And I even like passingly know what it is. Like I don't like have it burned and etched into my mind. So.
And I think that's the important part is that like pretty much the only aspect of it that you've been spoiled on is what it looks like. And I think the magic of it is still preserved when you kind of finally get to that point in the story. So I think you'll still kind of be able to kind of appreciate it for what it is.
We're gonna have to do a tier list on ultimate transformations, or like just like transformations in anime in general.
I would love to. I know we kind of ventured into power scaling for a little bit at the beginning there. I would love to kind of do a tier list for One Piece characters because I think that is because there's not like such a hard power scaling kind of aspect to it.
Way to talk about One Piece. It's like these guys are in this box.
Exactly, and so because there isn't such a quantifiable kind of way to approach it, I'm sure people are going to disagree with us regardless because they've tried to kind of crunch the numbers of every single feat that every character has ever done. But I I do think because there isn't like a hard quantity or hard kind of value assigned to each character, that it would be interesting to kind of put them in tier lists.
I think that's kind of how the characters view it as too. I remember there was a moment, I think it was Mihawk and the Phoenix guy, where they both kind of looked at each other like, "Oh, like are we about to do this?" Like it's like they're not even sure. They're like, "What are we? You
Do we
wanna?"
want to do this right now?
And I think they said no. I think Mihawk was like, "No, I don't want to. I
I
don't
don't
want to
think I
do
want
that."
that. See, like that stuff like really interests me.
Yeah, it is. It's it really are like the characters are best described as tier. Like it does. Like I get the impression that they don't even know who would win. Like there isn't necessarily a hierarchy. They're just kind of getting a feel for each other. Like I like kind of size each other up, and you don't really know what'll happen until it goes down.
Yeah. All right, man. The One Piece.
I'm getting there, man. I'm really close. I'm not. It's gonna feel really weird. Although I have been doing a little bit of venturing into One Punch Man, so
I just finished up Mob Psycho. Actually, the anime came to a close, and what a beautiful story! What a beautiful 3 seasons of
okay.
anime.
Yeah.
If you have not watched Mob Psycho, if you want us to do some Mob Psycho content, let us know. If you want us to do any of the content that we kind of alluded to in this video, whether it's this tier list, whether it's kind of debating head to heads for One Piece characters, whether it's doing that for Dragon Ball, any of these like Dragon Ball like transformation rankings, stuff like that, let us know, man. We're
Yeah,
down.
we're doing some Tattoo Thursdays coming up too. That was a series that we've shelved for a long time, but like I've come to realize that like people actually like it.
That's a fun one.
It is fun. It is actually really fun. I genuinely enjoy doing that. All right, man. Well, that was good stuff. We'll catch you guys next time.